Have you ever wondered what it might be like to live an average life in the land of Skyrim from the hit 2011 video game Skyrim? Like if you had to work a Skyrim job, live in a Skyrim house, and eat Skyrim food, what would that look like? I wanted to figure that out, so I came up with a little experiment. I'm going to live for 3 straight weeks in Skyrim. I mean, I'm going to pick the most average job and do it every single day for hours at a time. I'm going to pick the most average house and go back there every single night to sleep. I'm even going to purchase real-life foods that match what I'd actually have available to me in Skyrim so that I have average Skyrim nutrients flowing through my body. And I'm not just going to do this casually. In order to get completely detached from my reality and completely locked into Skyrim's, I'm going to black out every window in my house, cover up every clock, and do the entire thing in one sitting, which, because Skyrim's day-night cycle is 72 minutes long, is going to take more than 24 straight hours. Now, before we can just dive into the challenge, we have to figure out the 2 main aspects of an average life in Skyrim: where we're going to live and where we're going to work. For work, there were a few possibilities I considered when trying to pick the most normal life. Town guard seemed like a common job, or I could be a bartender at a tavern, kind of like we did for Cyberpunk. But after reading a little bit about the world of Skyrim and the type of society it is, it became clear what the obvious choice was. Skyrim is set in a world that's roughly based on Viking Age Scandinavia, which was around 1,000 years ago, and at that time, upwards of 80% of people worked as farmers. It was, definitionally, the most average job. Technically, it wasn't really farming in the way that we think about it now. Life was structured a lot differently back then than it is today, but the point is that they worked the land. They planted crops, they raised animals, they harvested food and sold it at the market. It was the backbone of medieval life, and it's undoubtedly the theoretical backbone of Skyrim life as well. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be a farmer. As for where we're going to work specifically, there are roughly 18 farms to pick from all across Skyrim and its DLCs, depending on how you draw the line, but the one I settled on was a little place called Battleborn Farm, just outside of the city of Whiterun. I picked it partially because it's in a recognizable area, but also because it has a great variety of things to do, including crop harvesting, animal husbandry, and log splitting. It's also fairly close to a source of fresh water, which is important to me because I'll literally only be drinking water in real life when I can access water in the game. Now, in terms of where we'll actually live, the reality of being a farmhand in this era was that we would probably just be given some kind of crappy bed or bench to sleep on inside the farmhouse itself, along with all the other workers. In this case, the farmhouse is pretty small, but it does have just enough room for me to throw down a sleeping bag in the corner to serve as a bed for the next 3 weeks. There's also only one other worker who actually lives here, a lady named Gwendolyn, whereas in real life you'd be living with upwards of a dozen other people depending on the size of the farm. Little did I know, Gwendolyn and I were going to be getting to know each other really, really well over the next 3 weeks. Do you have a nice day today, Gwendolyn? Was it fine? Well, all right. We're going to structure this challenge in 3 distinct segments to represent the actual work-life balance of medieval life, with each segment lasting 1 full week in the game. And at the end of each week, we will get a day off from work. Our first week is going to be spent getting acclimated with farm life, establishing our routines, getting to know our coworkers, and preparing for winter. The second week is going to be winter. And during winter, we will spend all week, which could be upwards of 6 or 7 real-life hours inside of the farmhouse in order to survive the harsh temperatures, just like you would actually have to do as a real peasant. And then the last week is going to be us coming back out into the world, harvesting our crops, and at the end of everything, we're going to attempt to push all of our crops into the city of Whiterun in a cart in order to sell them for money that we can use to have a huge feast at the end of the challenge. And if you know anything about these carts in Skyrim, you'll know that they can be a little squirrely. Well, I guess let's go get that. I finished taping up my blackout curtains, covered the last of my clocks, locked the door to my office, and prepared for one of the longest 24-hour periods of my entire YouTube career. My challenge began at 7 a.m. on Monday in real life and 7 a.m. on Morndas in the game, which is basically the Skyrim equivalent of Monday. I woke up in the farmhouse earlier than my coworker did, so I took the first hour of the day to have breakfast. And breakfast, in this case, means stew, vegetable stew. I had actually prepped this stew the night before, and it consisted of all the vegetables that were actually available at the farm that we'd be working, including potatoes, leeks, tomatoes, cabbages, squash, beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, Whatever. Now, if you're an avid listener of my podcast with fellow YouTuber Memoria, you'll know that I hate stew. In every case, would it not be better if you just took away the broth and just ate the shit that was in the bowl? So the idea that I was going to be eating this stew for every meal over the next 24 real-life hours was pretty brutal, but that's what an average peasant would do, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, to my surprise, the stew that I made was actually halfway decent. That's okay. This was shocking to me because I intentionally did not look up how to make a stew before the challenge because I felt it would be more realistic if I just vibed it out like a farmer. And thankfully, I guess stew just isn't that hard to make, which is maybe why it was so ubiquitous in medieval life. You also might notice that the portion of stew I'm having here is extremely small. It's actually a 1/20th sized portion, and all of the food that we're going to eat today is going to be 1/20th sized portions. The reason for this is that the time scale of Skyrim is 20 times faster than the time scale of real life. So in order to make sure that we match our real life hunger cycles to the hunger cycles of our Skyrim peasant character, we have to adjust the portions of food so we can eat equally as often as our character would without stuffing ourselves to the point of exploding and dying. This also means that I will be eating plain vegetable stew roughly every 20 minutes for the next 24 hours, but we'll deal with the consequences of that later. After finishing breakfast, we headed out the door for our first day of working the land, and the first thing that struck me was just how nice of a view we had. The tallest mountain in Skyrim was right in our field of view. There was a beautiful river right across the road. There's the wide open sky. Skyrim is just a beautiful game. It felt like it was going to be a great place to be a peasant, but no lollygagging. I had to figure out what we were going to do for work every day, so I walked over to our only co-worker, Gwendolyn, and tried to get a sense of what I should be doing. Hello, ma'am. How are you? Man, she is looking right at me. I feel like that look is telling me I should be doing something else. I'm going to do a lap. How about that? I'll do a lap and sort of get the lay of the farm. So one of our options is obviously to stand here and just help till the earth for these leeks while our boss stares at us menacingly, but I decided to do a lap around the whole farm first and get a sense of what other options we had as well. And there were not as many as I thought there might be. We had some chickens over here to the north. There was a cow that we could hang out with a little pen down here. There are leeks and gourds growing up here, as well as wheat in its own area next to that. But the only actual gameplay activity on the farm is here with the wood cutting log, which we will use to gather firewood for wintertime. But aside from that, our world here is pretty small, which means our days are just going to be a lot of walking around, pretending to tend a farm in a video game. We're going to be just punching all the plants. After a few hours of working, to my surprise, another worker showed up that turned out to be Gwendolyn's sister, and I immediately started talking to them like they were real human beings. Okay, hey, you work here too, huh? I'm Austin.
This war's as stupid as our feud with Clan Greymane.
Oh, we talking politics at work now?
Need something?
No.
Unlike the rest of my family, I've got work to do.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, you guys are working up a storm. It turned out that this lady would be showing up every single day about 4 hours later than Gwendolyn and I, and her and Gwendolyn would basically take turns working on this patch of leeks on the south side of the farm, which basically meant it would be my job to do everything else, which was fine with me. You know, the more activities I could use to pass the time, the better, because I'm literally not allowed to leave this farm. After what felt like an eternity of walking back and forth, talking to Gwendolyn and her sister, and chopping wood for the wintertime, the sun finally started to set on day one, which was my signal that my first workday was done. I still wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do after work each day, so for now, I headed inside, genuinely very hungry since all I had had to eat so far in real life was about 2 tablespoons of vegetable stew, and I sat down to have dinner. Funnily enough, as soon as I sat down, Gwendolyn also sat down with me, so I decided to strike up a conversation with her. Did you have a nice day at work? Yeah, I felt like I was getting my sea legs, you know, wouldn't you say? And after realizing that, at least for now, she was a woman of few words, I finished my dinner with a tiny bite of bread, read a little book that was on Gwendolyn's bookshelf about gods and goddesses in Skyrim, and then went to bed. The next couple days passed much like the first one. We'd eat our stew in the morning, head outside to take in the beauty of the mountain, and then get to work. Our workdays mostly consisted of pacing back and forth, pretending to tend to the crops, but we'd occasionally chop wood, talk to the animals, and fetch water from the stream, which helped break up the monotony a bit. But by the afternoon of day 3, I was really feeling the boredom starting to set in. I feel like this is day 7, and it's only day 3, which is not good. Soil looks healthy. Oh my god, I thought that was a worm for a second. But it's actually just a leaf clipping through the ground. Remember that I hadn't seen the sun or a clock in several hours, and I had blacked out my curtains well before sunrise that day, so my body really wasn't sure how long had passed. All I knew at the time is that it felt like each day was a real slog, and it was not getting any easier. Now, in some ways, this is probably just how it was to be a medieval peasant. Long, boring, slow workdays. But one thing I actually learned in my research for this video was that, aside from the actual harvesting season, which was brutal, working the land on a typical day back then often included lots of moments of chatting with others, multiple breaks for meals and naps, and a pretty wide variety of chores. So you wouldn't just be doing one menial task for 8 hours Henry Ford style. You'd be doing things like planting, watering, fixing fences, milking cows, etc., all day long with several solid breaks throughout the day. Which isn't to say that it's better or worse than modern work life. There are lots of benefits to modern work life, even though it's easy to forget about them when you're on your 7th hour of staring at a spreadsheet alone in your home office. But there were also things that about medieval life that were nice. Ish. Usually every day around the time that Gwendolyn's sister arrived to the farm, I would stop working for a bit and have a drink. Sometimes I would walk down to the stream to get water, but typically I would be drinking ale, which is basically just beer, from my Skyrim appropriate mug, because it was a common way that peasants actually got carbohydrates while working long hours. They would just be drinking ale all day. Now, the ale that they would have been drinking back then was pretty low in alcohol content, much lower than your average beer at the grocery store. So in order to simulate that, I got the lowest alcohol beer I could find, which was about 4%, and then mixed it with about 50% water to make a nice watery 2% ABV drink. I also made sure to store it at room temperature so that it was lukewarm, just like it would be back then. Nothing like a lukewarm, watered down ale to get me through my farm day. Now, as the first few days wrapped up, I definitely felt like I was settling into things, even though I was extremely bored, when one day after work, Gwendolyn came in the house, and rather than sitting down to eat with me like she normally did, she just drank a whole bunch of beer and then passed out in my sleeping bag on the floor rather than in her normal bed. This is the first time she did that. I thought about waking her up and taking my bed back, but I figured if she was drunk enough to prefer the floor, I would let her keep the floor, which meant I got to sleep in the bed. Plus, we were slowly becoming friends, whether I knew it or not, and that's just what friends do. By day 4, I was pretty over it. Like, legitimately, I was very angry at what I was doing, which was surprising because if my math is right, it had only been about 4 hours since the challenge began, but I didn't really know that at the time. We've been looking at leaks for as little as 4 hours, or possibly as many as, I think we potentially spend 7 or 8, I don't even know. Now, at first, I chalked it up to just being totally detached from the real passage of time, because I learned from Mr. Beast that solitary confinement really messes with your brain. But when I stood up to go check the VOD recording in between days, I glanced at my Twitch chat for a second, and I saw something interesting. People were telling me that I needed to check the time scale in the game, because they thought something was wrong. So I pulled up the Skyrim console commands, and I checked the timescale. And it turned out, for once in their lives, chat was right. All right, I'm going to take the advice of the person who said to do the show timescale. 10. Isn't it supposed to be 20? It's supposed to be 20, I thought. It is supposed to be 20, but somehow, maybe because of some of the mods I tried to install for the challenge, the timescale got changed to 10, which means that the time in-game was flowing half as fast as it was supposed to. Now, on one hand, this explained why I felt like the first few days were taking an ungodly amount of time, but on the other hand, I had just added several unnecessary hours to the challenge, which meant that by the end of it, I was going to be in even rougher mental shape than I had planned for. Not good. I briefly considered making up for lost time by adjusting the timescale to run a little bit fast for the rest of the challenge, but that just didn't feel right, so I set it back to its normal 72-minute cycle, and we continued on with our week, much further behind schedule than we anticipated. The good news was that this is actually where things started to get a little more interesting. Of course, 99% of our time was still being spent crouching on top of crops, gourds, listening to Gwendolyn's sister complain about the war.
This war's as stupid as our feud with Clan Greymane.
It really is. And pretending to clean up the cow's enclosure by dragging this rake around. But towards the end of day 4, something amazing happened. So it could be some kind of beer. Whoa, a nobleman. A nobleman with his escort on his way to the castle. A nobleman came down the road on a horse, which was the first interesting thing that had occurred in the world all challenge long. This was amazing for a few reasons. Number 1, it broke up the monotony by giving us something to look at. Big win. Number 2, because of how unbelievably bored I was, Seeing this nobleman actually gave me a feeling of wow, like I was a real peasant seeing royalty and not just some YouTuber playing Skyrim. But the coolest thing that happened when this nobleman showed up is that he was actually carrying a letter for us. And the letter said, quote, "I was able to track you down because all of your personal information is available for anyone to read on the internet. If you want to prevent this in the future, you should use delete me." What the heck? Really weird. Welcome to the sponsorship. Okay, 30 seconds. Here's the pitch. I don't know if you know this, but there is a lot of information about you available online. And in the past, this information wasn't as easy to find because it was scattered across lots of different boring websites like government paperwork databases and stuff like that. But nowadays, there is a problem because in the year of our Lord 2026, there are these people called data brokers. And these data brokers take the time to scrape all of those random websites for your information, like your name, your birthday, your phone numbers, addresses, sometimes even your family members. And then they package all of that information together into a little profile that they put on a people search site. And do you know what they do with that little profile? They sell it to literally anybody. This, as you can imagine, is a problem. I can think of a whole bunch of ways that this type of access could be misused, causing you anything from mild annoyances to pretty huge problems like identity theft or, like somebody coming to your house. Not that that happens often, but it could happen. Delete Me is a service that takes care of this problem by both automatically and manually going to all of those websites and doing whatever needs to be done to get that information taken down. They use their own tech to do this. They don't outsource to third parties, and they have real human privacy advisors that are available to help you with custom requests when you need it. You sign up for it, put all of your information in, and then month after month after month, they continuously monitor and attack any instance of your data that they find, meaning you're pretty well protected from all of the common issues that stem from your information being out there. So I'm happy with it, and if you're concerned about stuff like this, you will be too. Of course, I have a 20% discount that you can use by going to joindeleteme.com/AnyAustin and typing in promo code AnyAustin, or you can scan the QR code on the screen if you're one of those people that watches YouTube on your TV. Again, that is joindeleteme.com/AnyAustin, promo code AnyAustin. Anyway, let's go back to talking about this nobleman in Skyrim. Like I said, the thing that really struck me about seeing this nobleman was how exciting it felt to me. Skyrim is a game that pretty quickly makes your player character feel like the most important person in the world, and as a result of that, a lot of the social and political nuances of the setting kind of go in one ear and out the other. You're basically meeting Obama-level politicians within 3 weeks of being on death row with very little fanfare beyond basic lip service, so seeing some guy on a horse wearing a nice jacket it's not really the most exciting thing, But in the context of our farming life, I was borderline a little starstruck. Gwendolyn, we gotta see if we can watch the nobleman go to the castle. Can I just go up there to watch the nobleman, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I climbed up on this ridge to get a better view of him walking away when I suddenly noticed that something strange was happening in the distance. I decided to sneak away from my work for just a moment to have a look, but as soon as I got to the place where I thought he was, something incredible happened. Holy shit. No way, a flying horse. And again, because of the context of being so bored and so detached from reality, I didn't have my normal reaction to this, which would be to say, man, I love the creation engine so much and I hope they never get rid of it. My reaction instead was awe. I immediately thought of the book I'd read the last couple of nights before bed. There was this book that we were reading about gods and certain people in Skyrim being given godlike powers due to their social status. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of performance to this whole thing, right? The experiment doesn't work if I don't intentionally take it seriously and make an effort to engage. But in a funny meta way, a human being given the power of the gods is kind of exactly what happened. Skyrim, the video game, like the code that makes the game run, bestowed upon one of its NPCs a new power that I, the player, bore witness to. And without an immediate rational explanation for that power, I attributed that to God. God, in this case, being the game's code, which I think makes Todd Howard the Pope. We went too far, but you get what I'm saying. I went back to Gwendolyn and tried to tell her about what happened, but she, of course, only cared about one thing: farming these damn leeks. So I shook those grand stories from my mind and got right back to pacing back and forth, pretending to farm crops. The next couple days were much the same as the first couple. A lot of boredom doing the same things over and over again, with the occasional moment of excitement, like a bandit attack or whatever happening across the river. We did get in a nice habit of actually saying hi hi to Gwendolyn every morning, which felt nice. Good morning, Gwendolyn.
Good morning.
And on my breaks during the day, I ended up spending a lot of time just kind of looking up at the giant mountain. And each day, the top of the mountain started feeling further and further away. In fact, the more time we spent at the farm in general, the more everything outside of the farm started feeling foreign and far away. It almost felt like a little bit of that initial magic of Skyrim, like the feeling of this wide world that you've yet to explore was trickling back in for me, and I started seeing the mountain as a place of mystery and wonder rather than just a dusty old rock full of wizards, which of course we know that it is. Which is really fun given how much I played Skyrim. That's a cool feeling to sort of bring back. That said, we were coming up on the end of the first week, and I was both a little sad to know that I was about to be locked up in the farmhouse for 6 real-life hours, but also excited because tomorrow was our first day off.
Wait, is that day 6? Wait, that's our whole work week. Why does that make me a little bit sad?
Before going to bed that night, I ended up going outside to use the bathroom. I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, but yes, I'm only using the bathroom when I can get to a suitable place to do so in the game. And on my way back from doing that, I ended up spending some time stargazing, which I'd never really done in Skyrim before. I didn't recognize any of the constellations, but there were definitely clear groupings of brighter stars, and it was fun to think about how we might interpret them if we were given more time. But then, I went back inside to pick out another book from the bookshelf to read before bed, and lo and behold, we pulled up a book all about the constellations in Skyrim's night sky.
What are we reading this evening? We're reading The Firmament. Oh my god, this is so relevant, you guys. We read a book about gods, and then we saw a god. Now we just went to go look at the stars, and we're reading a book about stars.
This sort of weird synchronicity kept happening with the books that we were reading during the course of this experiment. You know, the flying horse that we saw right after reading a book about people being given godlike powers, and now a book about the stars right after doing some stargazing. And there are 2 more instances of this sort of thing happening. One is going to come during winter, and then one happens on literally the very last day of work. And all that stuff together really made it feel like I was getting swallowed up by the game's code. Like Bootstrap Bill in Pirates of the Caribbean. Part of the ship, part of the crew. I don't know why I'm bringing this up now, honestly, because it'll only make sense if I just get to everything in order, so we'll come back to the books in a minute. Let's just keep going. Day 7 was our day off, and it was interesting. Just like real medieval life, we were given 1 day off every week to rest and ostensibly go to church, but also, hit the tavern or whatever else we wanted to do. And I decided to get up early to see the sunrise before heading into town to try and find some kind of temple or something to worship at. As soon as I opened the front door, though, it was raining.
Oh, it's raining. No, but this is my sunrise day. I'm sorry, you guys. That was insanely whiny. Let me try that again. Oh, it's raining today. That's beautiful in a different way, but I am a little disappointed.
Obviously, this meant I couldn't see the sunrise, so I decided to try waiting out the storm inside of a secret little cave I had found earlier in the week. And then, when it just kept on raining, I ended up walking into town through the mud to see what we could get up to. The first place I stopped was Honning Brew Meadery, but as soon as I set foot inside, I felt out of place.
It feels kind of weird to be in like a nice place. Like I actually felt...
You need something to do, or you just enjoy slowing down the hard-working folk?
So I got out of there and headed into Whiterun, but things didn't really get better. I sat in front of a street preacher for a while who was proselytizing about the god Talos.
They can barely tolerate our presence!
But I honestly felt like I would have gotten more spiritually out of it if I had just spent some time looking up at that big statue. So then I popped into this temple of Kinareth for some spiritual peace and quiet, but what I found was just a bunch of sick people coughing all over the place and complaining.
Can hardly stand it.
Pain is so great.
The fever.
This isn't a good vibe for a place to come be, like, holy.
Which is fine. It's actually great that a place of worship is being used to directly help people. But it just wasn't what I was looking for on my Sunday, on my day of worship. And all this kind of made me wonder. You know, I was raised Catholic, right? So my whole experience of going to church was basically that you sit down as an anonymous parishioner in front of some grand installation of the divine, and then you'd be really bored for 2 hours. But then every once in a while, you have a little moment of revelation that makes your life easier. But Skyrim is not a monotheistic society like Catholicism would be. Skyrim has many gods who all have specific little shrines or temples across the world, and I just genuinely didn't really know how to engage with that given where I was and how I was raised, because it turns out that in societies like the ancient Greeks or the Norse, where there were many different gods, the idea of going to church wasn't really a thing in the way that we think of it now. Most of your worship would be done outside at sacred sites like this big tree inside of Whiterun, or inside the home every single day at a personal shrine. You might mutter a prayer when the weather changed.
Oh, it's raining. No.
Or make an offering at the start of a long workday.
Good morning, Gwendolyn.
Good morning.
But you probably wouldn't take a day off just to go sit inside of a dusty old church. This kind of follows the theme of the way that work life was structured back then as well. Everything was kind of done in moderation all the time. A little work, a little rest, a little worship, a little eating, a little drinking, every single day, all year round, with no time specifically set aside for leisure or non-working. Now, the one exception to this is wintertime, which is coming up next. But before I get to that, we've got to hit the tavern for a drink, as is custom for these challenges. Stopping in bars and restaurants in video games while doing a challenge like this is really one of my favorite things ever, because it really lets you appreciate how nice it is to sit inside of a bar or restaurant. Got a warm fire, you've got ample seating, we've got some wine. We even bought a sweet roll using some of the money from the farm, which I got to eat a 1/20th size piece of. But most importantly, we had music. The Skyrim soundtrack had been turned off for the duration of this challenge because I felt it would be more true to the experience of a peasant. So coming into the Bannered Mare and hearing this dude playing on that lute thing was just really, really nice. Hearing music is just really nice, and I feel like we take it for granted how much music we hear throughout the day. So I enjoyed the waning hours of my day off in the tavern with a bit of wine and a tiny piece of stale sweet roll, and then headed back home to begin the second week of the challenge, wintertime. Like I said a moment ago, in a way, wintertime could be both the hardest time for a peasant, but also the easiest. Assuming you had enough firewood to keep warm and enough food and drink to survive, most of your time during the cold months would be spent, talking with family, fixing up your tools, crafting things, making furniture, eating, drinking, and if you are literate like we are, reading lots and lots of books. Probably the most stimulating part of medieval wintertime would have been the conversations with your housemates, sharing stories, talking about life, whatever. And unfortunately for us, the only conversation partner we have is a wonderful lady named of Gwendolyn, not the best conversationalist. So in reality, our wintertime is going to be more about staving off that lonely boredom than it will be about swapping stories with our families or trying to survive. In order to try and simulate the medieval experience of fixing tools or crafting things during the winter, I actually purchased, I have it right here, a spoon carving kit, despite having absolutely no experience with carving knives, and I spent a good chunk of every day during week 2 attempting to create a spoon that I could then use to eat my stew for the rest of the challenge. In hindsight, this was basically really stupid. It gave me something to do, and it sort of helped me focus inward like a peasant might, but it was mostly just a good way to cut my fingers open 2 separate times. Ow, fuck. I knew I was going to do that. Make a huge mess.
Can you guys see how much of a mess this is making?
And eat a bunch of wood shavings while testing out the mouthfeel of my newly created spoon.
Pretty good. Tastes like wood.
The spoon didn't turn out half bad though. Here it is. You probably can't see it. I can zoom in a little bit. I'm proud of it. Week 2 of the challenge was really boring. And by this point I was getting actually tired. I still had no sense of what time of day it was in real life, but in my body it felt like it was 9 p.m. 14 hours after we had begun, despite the fact that if I did the math, it was clear that it should be closer to about 5 p.m. By the end of day 8, I was wandering around attempting to reorganize all the items in the house for no reason, and we started reading an incredibly boring book all about the entire history of the Empire in Skyrim, which did not help at all. Day 2 of winter went by much the same as day 1, only this time we started a new book called Myths of Sheogorath, and this one was actually pretty good. It was all about this trickster god who was pulling pranks and trying to freak people out all the time because he finds it amusing. Well, it's mostly about pulling pranks and stuff. It opens with a section all about how music was invented when they ripped this lady's arms off and turned them into a French horn or something. But after that, it's just a bunch of silly stories about this god causing mayhem. We were able to use the console commands in-game to actually change the weather to a blizzard during this part of the challenge, which is fun, but you'll notice that one thing we were not able to do is prevent Gwendolyn from leaving each day to go to work as normal, because to her it wasn't wintertime, it was just normal time. This meant that for the bulk of the day we were completely alone in the house, but at night when she got home we were still able to sit down and have a conversation with her. And boy did we take advantage of that.
Now here's a man I'm glad to see.
It feels good to hear you say that. I should really be talking to you more every day. Cheers to that.
Talking to NPCs in these challenges feels a little bit like how people have conversations with their cats. Like, the cat has no idea what you're saying, really, right? But because the human mind is so good at pattern recognition and we have such strong imaginations, you can basically make up entire discussions with your cats that actually have an impact on the way that you relate to them. And that's basically what's been happening with me and Gwendolyn. So at this point, each day in winter basically looked something like this. Wake up, eat stew, put a log on the fire, carve my spoon, read stories, jump around the house for a while, and then have dinner with Gwendolyn and go to bed. It was every bit as dull as working in the fields, only with less interesting stuff to look at and less space to walk around in. But I will say that around day 11 or so, as I read through more of the books that were available on the farmhouse, I started to see the same historical names show up in different books and started to read stories that took place in locations that I'd actually been to in Skyrim. It began to feel like Skyrim was a place with a history that I was a small part of, rather than feeling like a hero in a video game world having a great time. And for the first time ever, I kind of appreciated these books. I mean, I always appreciated them, but now it wasn't just a funny thing to glance at while rummaging through dungeons. They were actually an enriching part of the game. They made the game more fun. Not that I'm going to start reading them, obviously, because it's extremely boring. Towards the end of the second week, I had more or less settled into the boredom once again. We kept slowly working our way through the book about Sheogorath, learning about the ways he would haunt people and prank them and so on. And despite my increasing tiredness, I had kind of plateaued in an okay spot mentally, at least I thought so. But when I closed the book after finishing an afternoon of reading on day 12, for a split second out of the corner of my eye, I caught something.
What the f? What the f? What the fuck was that? Hello? We're having hallucinations for winter?
In the dead of winter, after nearly 2 weeks in-game where we never saw a soul come to the farm aside from Gwendolyn and her sister, a small, unidentified child briefly appeared in our farmhouse before disappearing out the front door like a ghost. Now listen, I'm a man of science, right? And I understand that these things are just coincidences, but when you're actually sitting in your tiny farmhouse with your curtains in your office blacked out and your brain is full of magical stories of gods, it is very easy to get a lurking sense that the game is watching you, especially when the most stimulation you've had in hours is the taste of cold stew. Now, I'm not saying this was the god Sheogorath playing a trick on us or doing some kind of poltergeist prank, but it is very interesting that shortly after reading that book, yet another strange, seemingly random glitch occurred that almost perfectly matched the subject matter we had just been reading about. That's just the magic of Skyrim, I guess. Or I'm haunted. Just like week 1, by the time week 2 was coming to an end, even though I had done nothing but sit inside a farmhouse for several hours, I was feeling kind of bittersweet about it. But we had to move on to our final week of the challenge, and I want to take a quick second to explain to you all exactly what we're going to be doing. So at the end of week 1, I had actually harvested about half of the crops on the farm in order to take them into town and sell them so I could buy the wine and the sweet rolls that you saw, but I also bought a brand new book all the way back then to add to our bookshelf called Uncommon Taste, which I thought sounded potentially like some kind of interesting philosophy book that we could read as a little treat for ourselves on our final day. So for week 2, we would be spending the first 5 days pretending to replant all of those crops I'd harvested, chopping more wood to replenish what we had just used over winter, and emotionally preparing Gwendolyn and the animals for our departure at the end of the week. And by this point, it wasn't just me that had grown attached to some of these NPCs. Take a look at these 2 pieces of fan art sent to me by Robin and Natasha on Blue Sky depicting our one-sided relationship with Gwendolyn, as well as the cow, which we had started referring to as Gouda. Despite the fact that every single character in this story is an NPC that wasn't meant to be talked to for hours on end, and despite the fact that they basically do the exact same things every day, through sheer force of time spent with them, both me and the hundreds of people watching the stream had grown embarrassingly attached to them. Saturday of the final week will be our market day, and this is where things are going to get dicey. On Saturday, we're going to take all of the new wood that we've chopped and all of the leeks that we've harvested, and we're going to bring them into Whiterun to sell in order to be able to afford to buy the things that we need for our feast. But we're not just going to walk to Whiterun like normal with the items in our inventory. We're actually going to physically place all of these objects into one of these carts and then attempt to push it all the way from our farm up to the city gates. And if you know anything about the physics engine in Skyrim, you'll know just how difficult that's going to be.
What are we Oh!
If we make it without losing any of our crops, we will sell them, buy the food that we need for the feast, and then come back home to set the table for a final dinner with Gwendolyn on Saturday night. And then on Sunday, we will have our scheduled day off. the final day of the challenge. And I think by this point, I decided what I wanted to do to cap off this long 3 weeks. I was going to attempt to walk as a peasant all the way up to the top of the Throat of the World mountain, which is the tallest mountain in the game, and look down upon our little farm just as we had been gazing up at the top of the mountain all week long. But before we can do any of that, it's time to get to work. Now, I'd like to say that spending so long inside the farmhouse for winter made the farm work a million times more fun, but pretty much instantly when I started doing it again, I was bored. I was actually so bored and sleep deprived by this point that I started wondering if we had somehow broke the time scale again, because it seemed like the days were just crawling by.
Oh my god, time is just crawling.
But no, things were normal. I was just losing my sense of time even more than before. The one thing I tried to do as often as I could this time around was talk to our coworkers more and try to make conversations with them based on the few lines of dialogue they had. One of my favorite little routines that Gwendolyn and I had gotten into was in the morning, because I realized that basically every time I talked to her for the first time on any given day, she would say the same thing.
Oh, hey, it's good to see you.
Now here's a man I'm glad to see.
And the second time I talked to her, as long as it was before noon, there was a pretty good chance that she would hit me with good morning.
Oh, and I forgot to say good morning. Good morning, Gwendolyn.
Now here's a man I'm glad to see.
I'll tell you something, Gwendolyn. First of all, good morning.
Need something?
Oh, I thought you were going to say good morning.
Good morning.
It was silly, it was purely performative, but it actually reminded me of some of my favorite coworkers at old jobs that I'd had, who sort of had these stock phrases they would say to you every day no matter what. I just really appreciate those people a lot. In fact, one of the neat details I realized about Skyrim because of this challenge was actually that the NPCs do know whether it's morning or afternoon, and if you talk to them afternoon, they might say good afternoon. Not a big deal, but it's something that I wasn't aware of before, so I thought I would tell you. The final week, as a whole, was largely uneventful. I'd gotten pretty good at controlling this rake to pretend to clean up the cow enclosure, and I did feel like the sunsets on this week were especially beautiful, but just like working at any dull job, it was mostly about passing the time, chatting with your coworkers, and trying to stay hydrated. The one little event that did occur was a brief moment where I had some NPCs on the road that I met who apparently had their entire life burned down by a dragon.
There are dragons about, traveler.
You guys saw a dragon?
No, I was too afraid to look. We have nothing left.
That sucks. I mean, they're farmers just like me.
And again, much like seeing the nobleman ride by, it was cool how much more I believed these moments in the context of this challenge compared to a normal playthrough of Skyrim. Like on a normal playthrough, dragons are like a joke, basically. You don't really think of them as actually threatening, but I actually felt bad for these two NPCs. Like I felt like they had actually lost their whole life. Anyway, I wrapped up my final hours of work on Friday. I took one last look around the space to try and fully appreciate this little area I just spent quite a bit of time in, and I headed inside to eat a bit of stew and finally crack open the book I had been saving as a reward for getting to the last day of work. This was the book I had purchased in Whiterun all the way back on week 1, and it was called Uncommon Taste, and my hope was that it would be some kind of artsy philosophy book about unconventional thinking in Skyrim, or maybe a biography of some interesting character like the one about Sheogorath. But you'll never guess what it actually was.
Uncommon Taste by the Gourmet. Combine all ingredients into a large soup pot. Once hot, you're done. This is literally a book about making stew. That's crazy.
That's right, the final book we read, the one that I specifically bought as a treat for the end of my last work week, was a recipe book for stew. I'm just gonna leave it at that. This is really the day I'd been waiting for this whole time. The day where we would gather up all of our goods, load them into one of those janky Skyrim wheelbarrow things, and attempt to push them all the way to Whiterun so we could sell them just like a real farmer would have to do. I had spent some of the final week practicing with the wheelbarrows and figuring out how to best push and turn them, and it actually turned out that, at least in theory, it should definitely be possible as long as we don't go over any huge bumps. I got up early to make sure I had plenty of time to get there before any of the stores closed, and I started down the long road to Whiterun. Immediately, it became clear that there was going to be an issue. The roads in Skyrim are technically paved with stone, but one thing you don't realize when you're just walking on foot or fast traveling is that they aren't exactly smooth. There are potholes in Skyrim. The roads are bad. I don't know why this is so funny to me, but something about having this incredibly common, boring human reaction of like, they need to fix the damn roads in Skyrim while pushing a cart, something about that just really tickled me. I loved it. Now, what I didn't love was how every tiny little potential mishap on the road because of these potholes meant that there was a 50-50 chance that my cart would go flying through the sky, flinging all of my goods into the wind, never to be seen again.
Please don't touch my cart. Please don't touch my cart. Stop.
Everything all right?
Don't touch my cart. Just, I'll move it to the side. Just if we can get it past this without it freaking out. Nope.
For a few minutes, things seemed to be going pretty smoothly. I had the navigation down pat, and the main strategy was just to keep an eye on where the potholes were and navigate around them. Because the cart itself didn't really have an issue going off-road as long as it was flat. The thing about that, though, is that in order to avoid the potholes, you do have to see the potholes.
Skyrim has potholes. I didn't know that before, because I've never had to push a cart on the road. Why are there all these potholes everywhere, dude? What are we Oh!
Thankfully, this was a minor incident. The 2 eggs that we got from the chickens broke, but aside from that, it only took us about 10 minutes to get it all loaded back up and continue on the road. Just a bit further along, guess who we saw?
Oh, look who's on our way to work. Just on my way to the market. How are you doing?
A fine day to you, friend.
Admittedly, we weren't as close with her as we were with Gwendolyn, but it was nice that we got to have one final goodbye moment with this other little character that was with us consistently from day one, even if she did try to talk about politics way too much. Eventually, I made it to the final turn towards the city itself, where there was an absolutely disgraceful series of potholes, but I navigated around them with ease and made it up to the first big challenge of the outer city itself, getting up onto this little bridge.
Oh boy. You think we can do this? That's only one way to find out. Come on. I believe in... Ah, fuck.
It took a little bit of finagling to clean it up, but eventually we made it over and we were almost to the home stretch. I kind of realized that the best way to get the cart over bumps was to do one wheel at a time, you know, kind of pivot it around the center and then push it forward. So as long as I could see and prepare, it was really no issue. It was when I couldn't see and prepare that it continued to be an issue.
Yes, yes. Oh my god. Just expert moves. I did the little... You saw I did the little one wheel thing.
But once again, we were able to load it back up and keep pushing, finally making that last turn right up to our destination, the city gates. And using all my skills I had gained over the journey, with one last big push, I made it. Flawless execution on the last ledge. Congratulations to us. It was getting late in the day, but I managed to make it to the general store just a bit before it closed, and then I sold all of my goods, popped over to the tavern, and purchased all of my supplies for the feast. The walk back to the farm was a little bittersweet, as you might imagine, especially because it had started raining, but I made it home with plenty of time to spare before Gwendolyn finished her workday, and I took a few minutes to set the table, sort of. Now I know what you're thinking. Hold on, Austin. Is that salmon steak and apple pie on the table for the feast? Don't you know those things need to be cooked? How are you going to cook them without leaving your solitary confinement chamber? Great question. There were a few things that I neglected to tell you about this challenge because I wanted the video to have good retention. Like if you notice here, I have a wool blanket draped over myself in this footage, which is because in order to simulate Skyrim temperatures, I turned down my central air conditioning as low as it could go, and I used that blanket to stay warm. And in the case of the cooked food like we're going to have for the feast, I had actually developed a system where I could leave a written note inside a joined bathroom that my partner Ashlyn would pick up at the top of every hour, and then she would deliver whatever it is that I needed into the bathroom using the external door, so I could then go pick it up without ever having to see the outside world. Sort of like how they do food in solitary confinement in prison. I even had the lights in the bathroom set to simulate a fireplace and an iPad plugged in pumping Skyrim farm ambiance noises into the air so that I would stay totally immersed while in the bathroom. Now, in hindsight, this ended up being stupid, kind of like the spoon thing. I don't know that it really added that much to the learning experience, and in some ways it probably took me out of the experience because of how tedious it was. But hey, that's how we did it, and it worked. So I had this freshly made salmon steak and apple pie along with our other food items fully prepped, and after about an hour of waiting, she finally showed up.
Gwendolyn, these last 3 weeks have been a real pleasure and horrible. I mean, I'm not that emotionally attached always, but I'll say it. I'll say to Gwendolyn for having us at your farm and allowing us to work. Oh my gosh, she's literally eating. Wow, what a blessing.
After that brief toast, I took my first bite of a proper cooked meal for the first time in the whole challenge, and it was truly delicious. After a bit, Gwendolyn stood up and started working on this stew that I was never going to eat again, and I went over to sort of say goodbye and pay my respects to this piece of game code that had accompanied me for so long. And you know what, you guys? I think that piece of code, the piece of video game code that we call Gwendolyn, I think it didn't want me to leave.
What will you do when I'm gone, Gwendolyn?
Now here's a man I'm glad to see.
That's so sad. Will you miss me?
Yes?
Dude, that actually made me sad. Well, listen, maybe I'll come back and visit you sometime. Oh, she's drinking. I'm so sorry, Gwendolyn. Truly, it's rude of me. I mean, everyone has to cope in their own way, right?
I've said it before. I know that this is really stupid, but her being so standoffish actually felt bad. It genuinely made me feel bad. And I know I had been awake for God knows how long, and I know I had been doing the most boring things imaginable for hours on end, and I know my circadian rhythm was all sorts of messed up, but it still surprised me how affecting this was. I decided that rather than continuing to bother her, I would let her grieve my leaving in peace and head to bed early so that we could get up before she awoke and get out the door. I didn't waste time getting out the door when morning came, and aside from a brief, silent goodbye to our sleeping coworker and a quick nod to our favorite cow, I set out on the road to climb to the top of the mountain on what would end up being a gloomy final day. I was pretty sure that I could make it most of the way there over the course of a single Skyrim day-night cycle, but I didn't want to waste any time just in case, so I decided to cut across this field to save time rather than taking the Empire's poorly paved roads. This ended up being a mistake.
Oh, shit. You gotta run. Keep running, keep running, keep running, keep running, keep running, keep... Fuck!
And you know, that's really the thing about being an average person, isn't it? I'm Annie Austin. Thanks for watching.
I see your eyes, the rearview mirror, and all your junk sits